This is the tutorial on HtN. Before we learn how to use the program, let's look at some of the advantages of using HtN for the type of research we want to do. I discussed some of these points in the Holder Manager tutorial fairly briefly, but here I'll elaborate on more of the specific points related to HtN, whereas earlier I spoke about things more from a Holder Manager point of view. I'm guessing many of you are new to HtN, so I feel I need to go into a bit more detail throughout this part of the pack. The procedure side of things in HtN is a bit more complicated, so it does require a bit more explanation anyway. This is a comparison chart they've done with Holder Manager 2 and Program Tracker 4. It's available on their website. HtN is in the right hand column. Let's scroll down to find player pool analysis, which is the bit that's important for us. You can see it says that HtN is the only of the three that offer it. That's not strictly true in Holder Manager's case, because I've just shown you how to do it in the tutorial. But it was a bit difficult with the slow report refresh times on large databases, and with having to run separate reports for each decision point in each scenario. The difference is really that in HtN they've designed a part of the software called range research with this player pool analysis type of work specifically in mind, whereas the other programs weren't really designed for it. Also, scrolling down, we can see that import speeds are very fast. I found them to be around 4 times faster than Holder Manager, and also the database takes up less space on your computer. In addition to what they tell you here, I can give you some more information relevant to the type of work we want to do. You can see data on the pool instantly in the reports that are provided as standard. They're the ones that come pre-configured with the package. And also in your own reports after you spend a bit of time setting them up. You can also see all the data for all the scenarios simultaneously if you wish. In Holder Manager you can save your filters, but you still need to run each one individually. Things will become a bit clearer with an example. This is data for a 500,000 hand database of iPoker 400NL. Your reports are listed here. They won't be listed on the left like mine, but rather along the top as default. But don't worry, I'll show you how to change that. This report is for pre-flop, and it's one of the standard reports. I showed you this briefly in the PO tutorial. You can see that lots of decision points are being viewed simultaneously here. This would require multiple filters to be written and refreshed in Holder Manager. You don't need to do anything special to view this type of report. It's available as standard in range research. In this tutorial I'll show you how to configure your own reports, which can look like this. Here I've got all the data I need for this whole study for single raise pots, viewable in one page. I've blurred out some of the data as it's not our intention to give you everything, but to give you the tools to do it for yourself and enough information for you to know what can be achieved. The data here is for big blind versus small blind single raise pot in position. For each decision point listed across the top, you can see the pool's data generated by HtN in blue, with the sample size in white in brackets, and the PO data from our PO work is in orange, which I've entered manually. So here we're not just viewing the pool data on its own, but we can view the data from pool and PO together, just like in the Excel tables I've shown you, which is very convenient for us as there's less manual data entry required. I would recommend though that you record and store your PO data in the type of templates I showed you, in addition to storing it here. I've got another report for 3-bet pots, and several others which allow each scenario to be broken down by board texture. For example, Here's big blind versus small blind in position again, with the pool data for all sorts of flop turn river combinations. It's a bit more work to produce these type of reports, probably doubling the total time required. I'll leave it up to you to assess whether you feel it's worth it. Returning to the advantages and disadvantages then, you can use a large number of data point hands with no performance loss, which is really valuable for maximizing accuracy with increased sample size. Here you can see for the small 500,000 hand database that I'm using here, I'm working with 1.8 million data point hands, which is roughly the equivalent to the number of data point hands we were using in the holder manager tutorial. For my large PokerStars Zoom database though, which is around 20 million hand database, I was able to work with a total of 120 million data point hands with no performance loss at all. I spoke about the concept of data point hands in the holder manager tutorial, but for those of you who skipped that, each hand history can contribute multiple data points for our purposes, because more than one player in our sample or alias can take part in each hand. So we'll treat each of those data points as a data point hand. In Holder Manager, when I was running reports of 20 million data points, like I've said, it could take up to 20 minutes to refresh a report. And all in all, to complete the work I probably ran about 100 reports. Here, all those reports are being created at once. Finally, the alias of players doesn't need to be created manually. HtN can do it instantly based on the settings you can control. So whereas in Holder Manager we had to go through and add one reg at a time to the alias, in HtN you can just specify the criteria of a reg and the program will get them all for you. So this 1.8 million data point hands, they haven't had to be added manually. I've just set the criteria for the reg and it's automatically filtered out all those players fitting the criteria, totaling this amount of data point hands. It's not such an issue for small databases where it may only take you 5 minutes in Holder Manager to create your alias, but for large databases it certainly is. Now let's discuss some disadvantages. You do need to purchase an Edge subscription to get range research and the player pool analysis feature, which is what we need. It currently costs $40 a month, though you can get discounts if you sign up for 12 months. And you can get 10% off with the Poker Detox affiliate code. Here it is, so just make a note of that. If it doesn't work for whatever reason, maybe it's changed since I produced the video, so just check the website for details. The Poker Detox website, that is. A drawback of HtN is that after editing reports, you can't see the effect of changes until you rebuild all stats, which for a 3 million database that I've done it on takes about 30 minutes. So this makes the learning process a bit more challenging, so it's best to learn with a small database. You want it big enough that you get enough hands in your reports to see if you've written filters that are sensible, but not so big that the building stats step takes a long time. So maybe about 500,000 hands would be good, which is why I've got that 500,000 hands active at the moment. 500,000 hand database active. The technical support is quite slow at present. There are only a couple of manuals that are available in English, with the main language being Russian. It can take a couple of days to get a reply from the support team, and there is a bit of a language barrier, though in fairness they're clearly doing their best and they do get back to you. Hopefully the technical support will improve in time. So now let's get started with the program. So this is the main screen. You can check for updates here down in the bottom right. You can see I've got one pending. I'm choosing not to install it because I'm all ready to go ahead with the production of the video. You can see what's new in the update by clicking on the tab, on the link. So first you're going to want to import some hands. So because I've already imported mine, my screen's going to look different to yours. You're going to see a big yellow box. So click on that. So I'll import like this, either from a database, a file or a folder. Navigate to your file directory and off you go. After import, you'll have some data in this window, which is quite handy. You can filter for biggest winners and losers. They're sorted by the most the players who've played the most hands initially. Then we can sort for biggest losers, biggest winners. I've blurred out the names. Just feel like it's fair to those players involved. And this is the 500,000 hand 400 NL iPoker database I was using earlier. So throughout the tutorial I'm going to use 4 features within the drop down menu on the top left. Pop-up editor, filter editor, range research, and configuration. Let's start with configuration. Let's go to the database section, where we can create and delete databases and switch between existing databases by activating them. So you can see I'm highlighted on iPoker 400 NL. Let's switch to iPoker 1000 NL. Activate. You need to make sure you let that window run. And I've switched databases. So now I've just switched back. Let's go back into configuration and database. I want to show you how to create a new database. New, activate. And we got a new database with no hands in it. Also in configuration, you can go to game types. Select the game type on the left. So for us playing 6 max no limit, it's going to be this one. And then you can set different pop-ups to be viewed in the reports in range research. So here you can see I've got a few I've been working on. This is the one that came with default of the program. I've created my own, in which I've created my own reports and then copied the reports that come as standard in the default pop-up into my own pop-up. If you do use multiple pop-ups, you'll need to switch between them in order to view the results of that pop-up in range research. You can switch here or you can switch in range research. I would suggest just using one pop-up because it eliminates the need to switch between them. Also in game types, you can define the parameters of reg in your research. This will be what the program uses to compile the alias view. For me, the main thing that distinguishes reg and fish is the VPIP to PFR gap. I think as default in the program it comes set as 0 to 8, but I feel like I've had to widen it. For me, it's not that critical. You just want to exclude the obvious fish from our data. If we tighten the parameters here too much, we're influencing the outcome of our research too much. I have my minimum hands set to 50, I would go higher, but I have databases of various sizes, and with the smaller ones, you don't want to lose too many players from your alias, or you won't have as many samples for your data as you could have. For each report we run in range research, we can specify additional parameters like this for the pool. So you can vary your parameters for each environment. Anytime you make a change here, you need to remember to hit save, otherwise it won't take effect. In the same tab, you can filter for big blind size within a database containing multiple stake levels. So for example, if you've got multiple stake levels from 200 NL through to 1K NL in your database, and you want to filter to do range research on just the 200 NL players, you could enter a big blind size of 2 to 2 here. And then you're going to need to go and clear and build all stats in order for that to take effect. And again, you're going to need to hit save. In stats appearance, you can specify to show your opportunities, so show the sample size of each action in your reports. This by default is set quite low, but for our type of work we want to set it really high because it's important that we see the sample size. Like, we don't need to see it if it's, you know, the exact number, if it's 333,276 or something, but we do want to be able to see it in all those cases. You know, we want to be able to see our sample size to confirm whether it's a very reliable sample or if the sample size might be a bit dubious. You can also set whether to make the stat transparent in appearance if the sample size is particularly low. So I've got this set to 10. You could choose to change it to like 50 or so, something that draws your attention to the fact that the stat may be questionable. But, you know, I just refer to the number in brackets personally. Then in rooms, you can see which rooms are supported. I imagine the list you'll see is longer than this, much longer. I've got an update pending in which I know they've released support for a lot more rooms, but they were all using a hand converter. So as they're clearly adding, you know, more sites as time goes on, I just wanted to show you this way of checking which sites are currently supported. Another tab in Configurator that I want to show you is System. And in Statistics, we can decide whether to exclude the reg versus fish spots automatically. To me, it makes sense to exclude them. I think it's set to exclude by default. We want to model how the pool plays versus us, who they probably view as another reg. Whereas I think most regs, will play differently against someone that is clearly a fish. Let's take a closer look at range research now. Here you can create a report, give it a name, and set the parameters of that report. So for example, here I've created one for iPoker 400 regs. I've selected the room as iPoker. I've specified I want the player to be a reg, as defined by the categories in game types, by the parameters in game types. I don't have any conditions set here in base stats, so it's just going to default to the ones that I put into game types for reg. If I wanted to do something different, you know, I could set it as minimum of 500 hands if I wanted to, if I had a large database, or I could change the other parameters according to that environment. If I select fish, then it's going to fill it with anyone who doesn't fit the parameters of reg that we set earlier. Set it as fish there, or I can set it as doesn't matter. It's going to include the whole pool. When you first create a report, or when you go and edit your reports in pop-up and filter editor, you're going to need to hit the rebuild button here. It's going to search for the number of players that fit the bill, or fit the parameters you defined, and when it's found them all, it's going to produce the result. I've already rebuilt mine, so I can just hit on result. So what we're seeing now is the data on all the players that fit the parameters that we just defined. This is the pre-flop report that comes as standard, as I've shown you briefly previously. Below it we have other reports that come as standard, and above it we have all the reports that I've defined myself. Let's just look within the report, see what we've got. We've got a lot of statistics. The statistic being, in this case, the 36%. And that's 36% of the time that middle position, when out of position, calls a 3-bet. So if we hover over it, we can see some of the shown down hands. And on the right, we can see the description of the scenario for which that 36% is derived. And we'll call this sort of description of the scenario a filter. The filter's got a name there and a series of actions leading up to the last action in the filter. And the statistic, or the percentage that's returned, the 36% in this case, is always going to be the last action in the filter. So it's 36% of the time that player calls in the scenario in which he's middle position when facing a 3-bet as the out of position player. You won't have these two numbers here. I've added these in myself, VPIP and PFR. I'll show you how to write your own filters and compile and configure your own reports shortly. Let's just look in a bit more detail at some of the other standard reports. So this one, PR, is for where the alias is the pre-flop raiser, and it's looking at his average post-flop actions. So for example, we've got an average in position C-bet of 60%, an average out of position C-bet of 51%, and by hovering over the statistic you get a lot more information. For example, if we hover over the barreling stat, we can see that he's barreling the turn 47% of the time. And when he does so, he's predominantly doing it with a bet size of between 0.6 and 0.8%. So these numbers are the makeup of the 47%. So that 47 is made up 29 of 0.6 to 0.8, 5.3 of 0.4 to 0.6, etc. You can also see a breakdown of the hands that have gone to showdown here with percentages, and in this bar across here for each bet size. And there are other similar reports that come as standard. So this is the pre-flop raiser as when he's 3-bet. So a 3-bet pot where the alias is the 3-better. This is a single raise pot where the alias is called pre-flop, and this is a 3-bet pot where the alias is called the 3-bet. And then we've got similar for 4-bets as caller and raiser. A couple of other things I want to show you at this stage in range research is up here there's a handy button to extend the screen if you wish. When you've got your headings, your report headings across the top, you're going to need to use that, but if you switch them to the left like mine, like I'll show you, you're unlikely to need to use that. In this wheel you can switch profiles. So we're switching pop-ups here, and you can switch game type. So the switching of pop-ups, you can do that here, or you can do it back in configurator and game type. like I showed you previously. So the features that we need to use in order to configure these reports are filter editor and pop-up editor. So let's take a look at pop-up editor. Here on the extreme left, there's a handy link into the filter editor function. So you can see here I've got a series of folders, each containing filters. And then moving just to the right, here's the list of reports similar to the one that I just showed you in range research. And to the right of that, we've got the actual makeup of each report. The 99 is just a default value that's returned while we're configuring in pop-up editor. So this is where we can determine which filters, which statistics we view in each report in range research. We can also control our headers, enter text manually, change font up here. If we want to take control of what's in a cell, so define the filter within the cell, if we just hover over it, we can see the description of the filter that's in there. And then we can access filter editor by either right clicking and go in edit, or we can go back through filter editor in the configurator. This is what we get. This is the filter editor screen. You can specify which pop-up you're working on here by switching. You can also create a new pop-up, give it a name. You can take a clone of an existing pop-up and rename it. You need to remember when you made a change in a pop-up in pop-up editor to hit save before you go and switch out or leave pop-up editor. Otherwise you're going to lose your work. Also, something I want to show you at this stage in pop-up editor is by clicking on this wheel here, you can change the placement of the tabs. So you can move them from the left, you can move them from the standard position across the top to the left, which I think looks a lot better. Now, something I touched on earlier is when you make changes in pop-up editor and filter editor, you're not going to be able to see them in your database, in your range research as results until you've done something called clearing and rebuilding the stats. That applies to the changes to the stats or the filters that you make. However, if you just make changes to things like the positioning of the tabs, the font, or you make a manual entry of your PO data, you don't need to go clear and rebuild all stats. You just need to hit save and then go back into range research and rebuild the report, which takes a lot less time than clearing and rebuilding all the stats. So we're almost ready to go and look at how to write our filters and configure our pop-ups. But before we do, there's quite a bit of work involved, and I think it's worth just taking another look at what we're aiming for. So there's really kind of two options where I can see you guys wanting to go in. You may just want to compile reports for the average action in each scenario, like I've done here. So for example, this is one report showing all 6 single raise pot scenarios that I defined earlier in the pack, and the average action for each of them with no texture information. And this is a similar single page report for 3-bet pots for 4 scenarios. Others will want to extend the configuration work to include texture data, configuring reports like this, 1 report for each scenario. So to make things a bit simpler for the guys that don't want to do this work, I'll split the remainder of this tutorial into 2 parts. The first part I'll show you how to produce these 2 tabs, these 2 reports, the one for single raise pot, the one for 3-bet pot. And in the second part I'll show you how to extend that work to produce the texture reports. The methodology I'm going to use is to create something that I've termed base stats. We'll do this in the first part. We'll create all of our base stats, which I've got in the report here called base. So by base stat, I mean the sort of core action. Here it's in position single raise pot. That's a pre-flop caller where the player bets the flop. So this is that action regardless of position, regardless of board texture, regardless of any sizings or anything. We'll go through all the decision points that we're interested in and enter the base stat for each one in a big long row along the top in blue. And then we'll use something called mass clone. Where we can very quickly and easily vary those base stats for certain positions. So we could say that this is, for example, the player in the button facing a villain anywhere between under the gun or cut off or just in the cut off. So in order to compile the 2 single report tabs without any texture information, we'll just compile this long list of base stats, then we'll use mass clone to vary the positions, and we'll copy and paste that data into these reports, enter our PO data manually, make our headings look nice, and that's it. Then in a separate video, I'll go on and show those of you who wish to use texture reports how to clone each row for each texture, and then you can take the whole lot and clone all the rows to vary those by position, or you can vary it by bet size or other actions. And then similarly we'll cut and paste the whole lot into their own separate report tabs, tidy up the headings, make it look presentable. I'm confident that the first stage analysis that I've described, getting the 2 main reports there on the left, single raise pot and 3-bet pot, is going to be the most productive form of the study for you. That's going to reap the most win rate, illuminate the most relevant hotspots for the amount of effort required. In Holder Manager, I suggested you capture the texture data as it was provided with no extra effort required. But as I pointed out in Hand to Note, there is quite a bit of extra effort to get the texture data. With the methodology I've used, it's going to be straightforward for you to go ahead and do the first part, creating the row base stats, mass cloning as I've just described in brief. And then you can come back like a month later with renewed energy if you want to dig deeper into this type of work and get yourself some texture stats. You're not going to have to redo anything because you'll be able to use the row of base stats that you created and just sort of slot in to the second part of the work. In terms of how long all this work should take, it's difficult for me to say, but before you start, I do want to give you, a rough idea of what I think it may take. The way I've done it is I've learned from scratch. So I'm giving you guys a significant leg up. So the times it's taken me is not really comparable to the times it's taken you. And plus, when I go and do it now, I'm a lot more efficient because I know the process. So I'd say probably to do the first 2 tabs here may take 3 to 5 hours. And then if you want to extend it into texture research, you're probably talking double that. Again, that's going to depend on a lot of variables, too many for me to mention. But something I just want to emphasize is it's not the type of work you want to rush. You want to make sure that all your base stats are written correctly, test them before you go off and put a lot of work into then doing your mass clones, because obviously an error in any of your base stats is going to lead to errors in your clones. Not such a problem, I suppose, if you're not doing the texture work because you've only created a smaller number of clones, but when you've gone and created 30 odd rows of texture clones and then a dozen or more individual reports from those clones, it's quite frustrating to realize you made a mistake in one of the base stats. They're not the sort of work to be rushed, so something to take your time with and check as you go.